Now, there are a lot of questions about transfers, given that this is the first Ask OTC after the January transfer window's closure. Ben on Instagram asked, after spending big in the January transfer window, what can Manchester City fans expect from their deadline day signing Nico González?
Well, I kind of feel that even if this was a little bit of a late signing, and obviously the chronology of it will make a lot of people think that is a
desperate,
desperate, and a reaction to what happened at Arsenal last Sunday for Manchester City. I feel this is a signing that should do them a lot of good. Of course, they have overpaid for him, which is what happens when you buy off a Portuguese club in the last couple of days of the transfer window. But that doesn't mean it can't work out for Manchester City. Now, there's the reasons why I think it will work is because clearly they were looking for something very specific from a new midfielder. They didn't want someone just to fill a gap. Of course, the Rodri absence has been hanging over their season like a big dark shadow. But I guess that they were always reticent about buying a like for like with Rodri. You know, if they were going to get someone to replace Rodri, it would have been, I think, a loan signing. And obviously no one can really replace Rodri, but if you're talking about a mainly defensive midfielder, it was going to be someone on loan, maybe a Douglas Luiz, for example, who knew City and was known to the City Football Group beforehand. I think they've done something quite smart in bringing in Nico González, because here is someone who can improve the midfield while Rodri's not there, but he can play with him later on. Let's bear in mind he's still a young guy with plenty in the tank, and Manchester City's transfer window has been quite coherent in that, despite the fact they've spent money, it doesn't feel panicky to me. It feels as if they've just advanced a rebuilding program, especially when you look at the age profile of the players that they've brought on. Now, Nico González is a player, when he first came through at Barcelona, people expected him to be playing alongside Pedri and Gavi and all of those as a La Masia product himself for years to come. Then when Barcelona started spending big, he kind of got edged out of the first team picture, which led to his move to Porto. Now, it was a little bit of a surprise when he went to Porto, because he was a player who was respected and valued and people thought would go a long way. But it's been a tough learning experience for him, but I think a valuable learning experience for him, because he is someone who has played in not great Porto teams over the last couple of seasons and managed to really grow in that time. Now, when we think of someone from La Masia, we think of someone small, super mobile, who's all first touch and cunning pass. And he's a little bit different to that. He's a lot bigger, for example, in stature than a lot of those players. He likes the physical side of the game, which was what attracted Sergio Conceição to him in the first place. So he's like 6'2", and he loves to tackle. That's a big part of his game. So he can do the defensive side of it, but in doing the defensive side of it, he can do what City specifically need to do and bring the ball out, because he's comfortable. If you look at him carrying the ball, he's in the highest percentile of players in the Portuguese Liga for Porto, bringing the ball forward. So that really counts as well. It doesn't give away the ball much. So all of those things make me think he won't, I think, chip in with as many goals as he has done at Porto, because he's done quite a few of those, because that simply won't be his job in the Manchester City team. But I think he can give them energy, mobility, which they've really lacked so far this season. And because he's got that really strong technical grounding, he'll be really good for them going forward.
Yeah, Nicky, Miguel Pereira, who's a friend of the show, by the way, has pitched in on this, and he says, he thinks, and, you know, this is going back to what Andy was saying a moment ago of where Nico González fits in for the Manchester model that we're familiar with. He says that Nico González is better suited to be an understudy for Gundogan rather than Rodri. Does that make sense? Yeah,
he's not a Rodri clone, and I'm catching myself on that and thinking we do too much of this anyway, saying so-and-so is the same as so-and-so, and no two footballers are identical anyway. And being an understudy does not mean being identical, but he's not he's not a metronome. That's not where he's going to fit. And I wonder if he will nevertheless be asked to do some of that during Rodri's absence. It wouldn't make any sense for Manchester City to go out and spend this sort of money on a player who does exactly the same thing as Rodri, because Rodri didn't die. He's coming back. So he's 28 years old. You don't want to bring in someone for this sort of money who's just going to sit there and not play when Rodri's back. But he is, as Andy was saying, much more someone who's going to advance the ball with the ball at his feet. He's someone who's going to want to carry it forward. And I think that is a marked difference. He's an interesting player because Andy was saying correctly, he's a very mobile player. He's not necessarily a explosively fast player. He's a bit more heavy in the step than that. But he is, I think, it's always convenient for Pep to be signing someone who, even if he's not the tiny, light-footed La Masia cliche of a graduate, he has nevertheless come through that style of football and understands exactly the sort of quick moving football, the quick releasing football. That's what I was looking for, that Pep wants to play with on the ball, and he is going to fit into that mold very, very easily. But I agree with Miguel. He's not Rodri. He's a different kind of player.
Yeah, this question from Josh on Blue Sky ahead of the Madrid derby this weekend. What are your thoughts on Atletico Madrid accusing Real Madrid of trying to put pressure on referees ahead of the Madrid...
I, for one, am shocked. Shocked that ahead of a big derby, a football team in Madrid, of all cities, where the press is always so shy about discussing these topics, would be trying to put pressure on the referees and suggest that they're being influenced one way or the other. I can't imagine why they would be doing that.
Well, I think... So what's
I'm being really snarky. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
What's happened here this week, and we talked in the main show about Real Madrid losing at Espanyol last week. What they were really unhappy about is Carlos Romero's tackle on Kylian Mbappe. Now, Real Madrid were doing quick break up the pitch, having been defending after about an hour of the game, and Romero's challenge on Mbappe was wild. It was a terrible tackle. Studs up, got him on the back of the calf. Could have been a lot worse for Mbappe than it was. Romero was not sent off, and then he went on to score the winning goal, which always happens, really, that sort of thing. When a player should get sent off and doesn't, you know he's going to have a massive impact later in the game.
Shakespeare.
And so it is. So, look, this is why Real Madrid were annoyed. But Carlo Ancelotti, who's normally quite sanguine about these things, he was furious, and he said, look, we just want an explanation, and I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask for an explanation. But because of the timing of it, obviously Atletico, and the war of words between Atletico and Real Madrid has been ramping up over the last couple of weeks, or more notably between Simeone and everyone involved with Real Madrid has been ramping up over the last couple of weeks. So if we go back a week and a half, 2 weeks, even before this, Simeone was saying, well, Real Madrid have had 120 years of advantages from referees, so I don't think they could really be complaining about stuff. The thing is, I think it's been taken slightly out of context, because Real Madrid, or certainly Carlo Ancelotti, and let's take Carlo Ancelotti because he's a reasonable man. He's complaining about this one particular thing, which I think he has every right to complain about. Now, of course, it gets blown up into we need explanations from the federation and all this sort of stuff, and then it blows into like a sort of. It's slightly gaslighty, actually, the way that Atletico have picked this up and Simeone has picked this up and run with it. And, of course, everyone else has joined in. So Gerard Piqué came out and said, oh, well, as a representative of Barcelona, well, Real Madrid have got cheek because of their 100 years of refereeing advantages, just basically copying what Simeone said. John Uriarte, who's the president of Athletic, said, well, look, no one said anything when Carvajal broke our player's leg last season, etc., etc., etc. So everyone's jumped on the bandwagon. All the arguments are really, really light on detail, but it goes to show that anything that you say in Derby week is just going to be blown up into something much bigger than it really is.
Yeah, Nicky, whilst you're still in shock, there's a question.
Sorry. I was very snarky in that reply. I didn't mean to have a pop at our question.
I enjoyed it.
A question for you from Arigit on X. What can Juventus expect from their two new Premier League signings, Lloyd Kelly and Renato Veiga?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that question myself, and TBD with definitely with both of them. Kelly is one of those signings where it's no fault of Lloyd Kelly's at all, but it's really hard not to be frustrated with Juventus and how they've approached the handling of the assets they had at their disposal, because they have this next-gen project that was all designed to create this sustainable future for them and have players coming through and getting development and playing in the lower divisions and playing for the next-gen side in the lower division. And then you bring them through, and then you get someone like Hyson and pack him straight off to England, Dean Hyson, where he's now doing quite well. And so you then have to sign someone who is older and hasn't really necessarily proved that they can play as well as Hyson is showing he can already, and you're going to not necessarily make a good financial outcome on that.
Is this a reflection of like the current financial rules for and how they affect most teams, rather than just the management of your squad?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, but Kelly is a symptom, not the cause of this situation, because the cause is that you wanted in the summer to back Thiago Motta and give him the opportunity to go out and sign Douglas Luiz and Coop Miners, players who cost a lot of money. And so they needed to bring some money in, and so they cleared the decks with youth players that added up to a lot of money, but you would let go of a lot of young players to do it. And whether or not that was a good decision, well, at the moment, Douglas Luiz has not been a hit so far in Turin. Coop Miners, I think, will get there, but has not had the best start either. So it looks like a bad decision, and Kelly looks like one of those decisions you then make trying to scramble to fix it. Is, okay, there's an opportunity here for a player who, to actually answer the question, Lloyd Kelly is someone who I think at Bournemouth people were pretty positive about. He's a versatile defender, can play on the left, which is something that is often valuable if you want to be flexible about playing with a back three or a back four. He can play at fullback as well as at centre-back, but he's been injured a lot. So that's why we haven't really seen him at Newcastle. And
he's not played well when he has played. But what's interesting to me, I think, when I was talking about the financial side of it, I think if you look at Kelly himself, it's not been a great spell for him at Newcastle. But Eddie Howe obviously knew him from Bournemouth, wanted him for ages, and then 6 months later he's like, yeah, I'm out. Why is that? Well, it's not because he's lost faith in him as a player, is it? You know, a lot of players, especially defenders, have had poor starts to a career with a Premier League club, and you just get past it because sometimes it takes time, especially in his case. He's got good defenders ahead of him. Fabian Schär's lasted a bit longer than I think anyone would have expected a couple of years ago. But that doesn't mean that, you know, he won't be really good for Juventus. I think this is really interesting. We're talking about Tomori on the main show, and really, I don't think he would have chosen to leave Chelsea at that point. But Milan has proved to be the absolute making of him, and maybe Juventus is this for Lloyd Kelly.
I do think there's absolutely now a clear direction of travel coming between England and Italy, which is self-sustaining, self-fulfilling, I don't know if it's the right word, but English players are looking at other English players who've gone into Italy and succeeded and gone, okay, that worked for them, maybe it'll work for me. Milan, we talked about on the show yesterday, that's a very clear core that's happened, and I think there's absolutely just the directness of, frankly, Kyle Walker, do you think he spoke to Tomori before he went to Milan? Of course he did. That's just a phone call that you have and you speak to the English player who's already there. That stuff's part of the conversation. And I think that influence is real. And I think, by the way, it's a great opportunity for Kelly to go and play in a different league and to have a fresh start after all these injuries and learn a different kind of football.
How about Renato Veiga?
Renato Veiga is a slightly different case. He's younger. He's 21 years old. He was at Sporting under Amorim, but never really had his chance to break through there. And then he went on to Basel and played, and then got lost in this mess of a million players that Chelsea have signed. And so he needs a chance to play as well. Again, left-sided player, someone who can open up options for you, quite versatile, play on that left side. younger, explosive potential, probably against someone who I feel like I'm very curious to see, but I don't feel like I know this player as a footballer yet enough to know exactly what they're going to do in terms of success or not at Juventus. I think between the two, Veiga is probably the one where I feel the upside is higher. But I don't want to do Kelly down too much. I think Kelly, if you'd asked a couple of years ago, perspective on him would have been very different. An injury has had this big impact. As Andy said, hasn't played so much. But I think it's an interesting opportunity for both footballers, definitely.
Question from Rakesh on YouTube. Interesting one. I mean, you told me what you make of this, Nicky. What are your thoughts on Andrea Belotti's move to Benfica? Is it an example of a player falling upwards following a pretty underwhelming 7 months at Como?
I feel like 7 months undersells it with Belotti, who I feel like has been not quite becoming the footballer we thought he was going to be at Torino for the whole middle part of his career now. And every time he moves on, you think, well, maybe this will be the one, maybe it'll be the spot. But he just hasn't. He hasn't delivered in successive spots, and it's hard to believe that the next corner is suddenly going to be the right one. But you never know.
Why do you think that is, that he hasn't delivered these opportunities?
Maybe he's just not the level of footballer we thought he was going to be at the start of his career. I think he's got lots of things that make you think he looks like a number 9. He's got the size, he's got the power. He certainly can bully defenders when he's feeling confident.
He always looked like he'd be great in the Premier League when he was at his best at Torino, didn't he?
Yeah, although I always push back a bit against that stereotype, because I think, well, we've got players like that in the Premier League. If you want to be great in the Premier League, come and give something different than the ones that are doing there. But I understand what you mean. He looks like that English style centre forward playing in Italy.
It's more bluster than like technical perfection, isn't it? But I think for me, the bit where he leaves Torino for Roma is the bit where he loses his way, because he takes so long to sign for Roma, and he I think probably counts on having more options when he's leaving Torino, because this is a player that Urbano Cairo, the president of Torino, wanted 100 million for at one point, who's been an important player for Italy. And so he gets the end of his contract, he goes, but because it takes so long for the signing to happen, he doesn't have a pre-season. And that is really reflected, Nicky, in his first season at Roma. And it's quite difficult. He never really properly recovers it from there.
Yeah, I completely feel what you're saying, and it's the big opportunity of his career to go and do that. But he's had pre-season since. It's not like that's the end of the story.
But do you not think that first season at Roma just completely shatters his confidence and really diminishes his status?
It certainly diminishes his status. To me, that feels. I completely get the story that you're putting together there, and I do think that confidence is such a big part of being a centre forward. And I feel like from the outside, Belotti is one of those players who sometimes does look a little bit fragile in that way. Looks, well, physically the opposite of fragile, physically imposing. Looks like he lets things get to him on the pitch. Looks like when things aren't going his way, you see it affect him, and so that momentum of his career getting underneath him. But I still come back to what you've already also touched on, Andy, which I just don't think he's technically all that. I think there is a context for him in which he can score goals, and perhaps it can happen for him again if he finds the right context, if he finds the right confidence, because he has got the physical get together. But I somewhat feel that the things that he does well are not so special, and a lot of Serie A defenders frankly just understand how to play him now, which they wouldn't have done as well as early in his career, and he isn't able to find answers to them.
Is Benfica the right context for him to score goals? He's a centre forward. That's what he needs to do.
You're absolutely right, and we talked about the opportunity and the right moment. I wonder if this is another sliding doors moment where he's just joined Benfica at the wrong time as well. Because if you think in the past month, when we're talking about status, Vangelos Pavlidis, who they signed for a lot of money from Greek football, who had a really difficult start to the season and certainly wasn't scoring in any sort of volume as well for the amount of money they spent for him. Well, he's gone on a bit of a tear recently. He scored that hat-trick against Barcelona in the Champions League, and that's been reflected in his Liga form. So how does Belotti get anything more than garbage time at the end of games? I think it's difficult.
To me, Fiorentina was the place where he should have. Because there was such a desperate need for someone who was a proper number 9 in that team under Italiano. That was the thing they were screaming for. And he got his chance. I mean, you could always say, he needed longer. He could have had even more time. But he got his games up front. And he just didn't do it for me. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but I think he's had his chances. And for Italy as well, frankly, he's played a lot for the national team, really considering that struggle, because Italy hasn't had a number 9. And I think that now that there is finally a new generation of the likes of Retegui coming through, you do, or at least I do, reframe him and go, well, and we're so hyperbolic in football. Me saying that he's not at this level doesn't mean I think he's rubbish and chuck him on the heap.
He still makes the cut, doesn't he?
But
he still gets
I'm just talking about,
makes the team sheet.
Is he as good as we thought he was when he was banging them in at Torino? My opinion is that he just was never maybe as good as we thought he was.
Yeah, and keep that philosophical thought going. I think we're going to need it for this last one, which is going to end up being something of a symposium on one particular player. Because Henry on X asked, how has Marcus Edwards, remember him, ended up at championship side Burnley after so much excitement about him at such a young age? We could be here for some time on this one, Andy. I think it's a fair question without being disrespectful, because at one point Marcus Edwards was seen as the next big thing, wasn't he? People had hopes for him when he was at Tottenham.
Yeah, they did. And what I think is interesting about the question is the implied nuance of it, because when he was so young and he was at Spurs, as you say, he looked as if he could, be a player that they could build the team around. It didn't happen. And I think when he's a little bit away from there, when he starts to make his way in first team football in Portugal, you realise that I think with Edwards, what's quite a shy, reserved character is unfairly misinterpreted as arrogance, because that ability together with not really engaging with people on a personal level, sometimes people take it as, he thinks he's better than us. No, he's not. He's someone with an extraordinary talent who is basically a bit shy. And Ruben Amorim helped to unlock that. He did very well at Guimarães when he went over from Tottenham originally, and then he worked under Amorim at Sporting. And the first bit of that, Edwards looked amazing. So when we're talking about him, there being excitement around him, there was the excitement about him at a young age. And then there was this excitement about him in his early 20s as well, as he really started to hit it. And I think when you look at his performance against Tottenham in the Champions League, of course, before that he scored in the Europa League against Arsenal for Sporting at the Emirates. But when he played that game at the Avalad against Spurs, and Sporting end up winning that game. But in the first half, Edwards almost scores a Messi-esque goal. It's a brilliant save by Hugo Lloris, but he takes on and beats 5-6 players, something like that. And it would have been Messi against Getafe kind of goal. It was unbelievable. And a player who can pull something like that out, he's not just a good player having a great game. He's something really special. Now, at other times under Amorim, and if you go into that game and the period around there, Edwards plays as a centre forward. Now you look at him and he's 5'6.5" with his boots on, and that's part of it, because he's all left foot as well, that makes you think at his best moments. Actually, it's sacrilegious to say, but there is a little bit of Messi there. The thing is, Amorim plays him at centre forward, and because of his stature, and because he's normally a winger, people use this false 9 around it. He wasn't a false 9. He played like a centre forward. He's brave and intelligent and technically gifted and engaging enough and strong enough that he can actually play as a centre forward, even though he's quite small. So there's this other string to him. But then, as we get a little bit further down the line, and he gets competition from Francisco Trincao after he comes back to Portuguese football, he fades from the picture. And from the last year, we've not really seen that much of Edwards. Now, Amorim said it. He says, look, on his day, we know what we can get from him, but we're just not getting it often enough. And I think Amorim did so well because he understood the kind of character that Edwards was. And so he knew when to put his arm around him. He knew it was about having close one-to-one chats rather than big bombastic chats in front of the team. He really got inside his head. But then he started to slip away from him a little bit. Now, I wonder if part of that is maybe a tactical thing, is that they become more of a possession-based, aggressive team. Maybe Edwards struggles to adapt to that. Maybe it's the fact that there's the competition from Trincao. But so much was going on for Amorim that whereas Edwards would have benefited from more one-to-one, he didn't get that. And of course, because of his character, the perception is, as he drifts away from the first team, he's just being sulky about it. Again, I think that's a misinterpretation of his character. So look, he's wanted to come back to England for a while. He's not at the level he would have imagined, but he's got a great opportunity and he could end up getting back into the Premier League because promotion for Burnley will mean promotion for him. There's a buy clause that Burnley are required to take up if they do get promoted. £8 million.
£8 million?
Which is way, way less than Spurs hoped for. Of course, Spurs still own 50% of his transfer rights. So
it was worth 50 million, wasn't it, before?
At one point, that's what people were looking at, 50 million euros or north. So
8 million. What a bargain. Anyway, and thank you because you answered the question very eloquently as well, Henry. You got what you asked for.
8 million, are you taking him for your five-a-side team?
Not at 8 million. I would have if you'd said 20 million. I thought, well, he's worth something, isn't it? 8 million. I don't have any friends. Let Burnley do the rest with him. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for listening to Ask OTC. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotun, at Andy Brassel, and at Nicky Bandini or at OTC Pod. And you can email us otc@footballramble.com.